Good morning, you Kirkers. Or whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. I miss all of y'all. I've been thinking about y'all the past couple weeks. We're in week 3 of our quarantine, going on week 4, going on week forever. This is our new normal. But I was thinking about it the other day. I've been wondering about how y'all have been doing out there at Homeschool University. And we're all a little cooped up in here. Little Evangeline is just crawling all over the place, getting books left and right, sitting in her little elephant chair, reading all day. She's a cutie. Emily is working from home, getting stuff done, hanging out with all the childrens. And which leaves me with a lot of time to think about what was the last time we were in a plague. And in our lifetime, never. We've lived a pretty comfortable life for a while now, but eventually something was going to happen, I guess. I don't know. So we're in the middle of this pandemic, but it's not humanity's first pandemic, right? Like, we've had other pandemics.
Now, there have been tons of plagues all throughout history, going back as far as 5000 BC. But two of the ones that I got really hung up on were the Plague of Cyprian, which happened in 249 and went till 262, and the bubonic plague in England, which went from 1348 to 1665. Started in London, went all throughout Europe. It was awful. Now, a couple reasons these two grabbed my attention is because of the church's response to those plagues. The way that Christians reacted to the plagues happening around them were so uncommon and unique.
For Cyprian was this bishop from Carthage, who during the plague of Cyprian preached a care for the living as opposed to grief for the dead. He said we need to take charge of the sick and care for every need. That was even said by a different bishop named Dionysius. Pontianus even said, it's incredible to watch the Christians because they're doing good for all, not just merely to the household of faith.
So in 1527, another plague hits Europe, finding the German village of Wittenberg, where Martin Luther is, and he decides to not obey the order to evacuate, saying that he wouldn't want to save himself and leave the sick people behind. He stays and continues to minister to the sick, even after losing his own daughter, Elizabeth. And he basically says this, that we die at our posts. Christian doctors cannot abandon their hospitals, Christian governors cannot flee their districts, and Christian pastors cannot abandon their congregations. That the plague does not dissolve our duties, it turns them into crosses, on which we must be prepared to die. This is the same Martin Luther who wrote in his own catechism to the church that thou shalt not murder should go as far as not even endangering anyone due to negligence or recklessness, that putting people in harm's way would be as tantamount to murder. He encouraged his congregation, saying that believers must obey quarantine orders and fumigate their houses, clean themselves as much as possible so as to quell the spread of any further disease. So that got me thinking, like, what is our response supposed to be now? How do we respond to this pandemic in our time? With the wealth of knowledge we've got from modern medical science, as limited as it is, we still know way more than anyone used to before. With technology, not really leaving anyone behind. We're just staying in our homes and talking to screens a whole lot more often. So that got me thinking about how this is Holy Week, right? It's Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday. And that's like as extreme as you can get, right? Like Jesus goes into a tomb dead and yet somehow comes back out alive. It reminded me that God really likes to meet us in the extremes.
So like in 1 Kings chapter 17, you've got Elijah, a prophet of God, out in the place walking around. It's been a drought for several years, no water. Everyone's suffering a little bit. He comes across a widow who's gathering up some sticks. And he says to the widow, hey, would you mind making me some bread? And she's like, I'm collecting firewood to build a fire to bake some cakes for me and my son. We're going to eat it, and then we're just going to go die. And he's like, that's fine. Do what you need to. But would you mind setting some aside for me? And she's like, that's fine. I can be hospitable about it in my last moments. And so she does. And guess what? She doesn't run out of flour. She doesn't run out of oil. She survives because of this little pocket of heaven that was created between the both of them. God said to Elijah, go ask this woman for some bread. He did. She was faithful, Elijah was faithful, and they created this little community where something survived, even in the midst of the crisis of the drought. And in Matthew chapter 8, you actually find Jesus reaching out and touching a fellow with leprosy. Very contagious disease, violating all kinds of purity laws, but Jesus doesn't care. He says, I see a guy in pain, I'm going to heal this guy in pain. Reaches out, touches him, clears up his complexion, fresh as a newborn, sends him back to his family, humming along. And Jesus goes around in his whole life and work and ministry doing this, teaching wisdom, creating community, healing people, bringing communities back together, healing whole cities, creating these pockets of heaven where you get to see heaven overlapping onto earth. So I tell you all this because I don't think I need to remind you that we're living in kind of an extreme time. This is a moment where we can see God a little more clearly. We can either be the woman that Elijah meets out in the wilderness going, oh, I'm just gonna die. We can be one of the lepers that Jesus reaches out to and gets to go home. And I think that there is a third option that Jesus invites us into, where we have received grace, and therefore we have something to share with others. The Apostle Paul writes about faith, hope, and love. And the greatest, of course, of these is love. But I also don't want to discount hope either. The hope that says that there is a future because God has showed up for us before. Ours is a God that shows up. Maybe not in ways that we expect. Maybe not even in ways that we would prefer. But God is there in our loneliness, feeling that loneliness with us. God is there with us in our joy when we share things like birthday parades or Zoom call meetings and lunch times with each other. And God is even with us as we wait impatiently for some kind of good news that says this is all over and we can move forward. And on that day, we can rejoice. So what are some ways that you can create these little pockets of heaven, these little pockets of hope where you are right now? What are some ways you can share that hope with others? The good thing about our hope is that it's a lot like love, and that the more you share it, the more of it there is. It's a paradox of calculus that you should run out of something the more you give it away. But for us, in this moment, the more hope we can share with the world around us, the more hope I think there will be to go around for all of us. After all, that's what Jesus's life, work, death, and resurrection meant, is that this was a task made one time for all time. So in our time, let's look past our present and into a hopeful future.